because they sweet talk. Like, that's what the whole Romeo pimp's about. They'll sweet talk you. They'll make you think that, like, you're doing it because you love them. Like, if you love them, you'll do that. Some guys are like, well, if you love me, you'll have sex with me. No, this one's like, if you love me, you'll go sell your body for me. And then they take all your money. They're supposed to take care of you, but it's all a form of control. When I first started working, I would have breakdowns. In the middle of a session, I couldn't do it. Till finally, I kind of just separated me and who I am when I'm working. Otherwise, I would go crazy. I would lose it. You numb your mind. The thing about heroin is, at a certain point, you'll do whatever it takes to get it. You need it. They get you where you're dependent on them for it. So you need them to survive, basically. I remember one time I was just outside smoking a cigarette and someone asked me for a lighter and he had somebody watching me. I got beat for that later, and it was just because someone asked me to use my lighter. Because I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody. When we went out, I had to tell him my order to tell the waiter. I couldn't look at anybody. I had to look at him or the ground. And if you messed up in public, then you were gonna get beat as soon as you got back to the room. And he'd make sure nobody heard. He'd turn up the TV and turn on the shower. And if you cried or screamed or anything, then he would take you out of the room, and you never knew if death was gonna be an option. Never knew. It's an epidemic. It's an underground epidemic that nobody has any idea about. Because when they see an escort or a prostitute, all they think is a drug-addicted whore that lives on the street. They don't think about the story behind it. They don't think about, is she being forced to do this? Does she have to do this? Is she getting beat if she doesn't do this? If I could wave a magic wand to solve this problem, it would just to have all the people that used to turn their heads away from the girls that are on the street corners or on the websites, and for them to reach out, to look, to open their eyes to see us, instead of turn the other way.
What would be some of the things that a kid would say that would make you think, I don't know that that's a friend?
So really, do you know this person in person? Then why are you talking to them? That's one of them, okay. Having conversations with them. But mainly it's in the behaviors and what's happening with your child that you can see those signs. So if they're wanting or asking to spend more time on the internet, more than usual, and they get extremely upset that they're not able to do it, and become emotional and volatile. If they're being secretive about the sites they visit, when you come and talk to them and they are hiding their devices and switching screens and not being open about what they're doing, that could be a sign. If all of a sudden they have new gifts that you did not give them, especially electronic devices, right? If a trafficker sends a phone or a trafficker sends some kind of device, or they've been given something, that's a sign of using sexual language you never expected to hear out of your children's mouths, not age appropriate. That's because they've been being groomed online. The grooming process isn't just about getting trust from a victim, but mentally starting to manipulate them to thinking that certain things are okay, that most definitely are not. Desensitizing
Let's push some boundaries.
Them. Yep. So those are some of the signs that you can look for
start asking some conversations about what's really going on in their life. Like, what would you say if a stranger asked to take a picture of you? Now, what if it was a really good looking stranger, like at the mall or at the movies or something, and he came up to you and he's like, dang girl, you should be a model. You're so pretty. Let me take your picture. Now that's a real technique that a real trafficker used, and he would look for girls, 12, 13, 14-year-old girls at the mall who were one at a time or two together. And he would go up to them and say, you're so pretty, you should be a model. And if those girls went, oh my God, I'm not pretty, you think I'm pretty? He knew that she had a low self-esteem, and all he had to do was buy her some sexy clothes, get her some makeup, take some pictures of her, put her online, and show her. Overnight, she would have 100 people or more telling her how sexy she was.
So, I guess I'll always start at the beginning of your stories. I come from, obviously I grew up in Toller. I graduated in 2016 from Toller High School, but my story actually begins a little bit earlier than that. I was fairly quiet in junior high and didn't, really be into that scene or anything like that. But whenever I got probably into my freshman year, I got a little bit of a wild streak in my hair and decided that I wanted to go, hang out with kids that were not my age and to start doing things. As soon as I started working when I was 16, it got a little bit worse. But when I was 15, I first started to smoke weed and I started to drink at parties. And, I guess for a 15-year-old, that is almost normalized at that age. Now, in this day and age, it kind of is. But I never really pictured it going any further than that. I used to, hear... It wasn't really in this area, but I used to hear about people that would get into like serious drugs, and I was like, oh, that'll never be me, because that's what nobody ever thinks. But it very much can turn into that. I come from a really supportive, loving family. I don't have any serious trauma from them that I deal with as far as like my reasoning for turning the way that I did. So it truly doesn't have to be anything from your background story. It can really be decisions that you make.
So according to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, just hot off the press, there's been a 106% increase in reports of child exploitation just in the first month of COVID-19. So that's just one more reason why here at Deliver Fund, we're not slowing down. Matter of fact, we're continuing to raise awareness. We are communicating with law enforcement. We're continuing to provide them with reliable and actionable intelligence so that they can take down human traffickers, bring them to justice. And our analysts are also searching and scouring the internet every day to find those fingerprints of these human traffickers.
Human trafficking is happening right here in our very own communities. And, it's like Nick said earlier, it's American citizens being bought and sold by American citizens. And it's really important for everybody to understand that human trafficking is not a respecter of race, ethnicity, zip code, financial status, because so much of this is now happening on the internet. Really, no family is immune anymore. Let's talk a little bit now about how human traffickers are not only using apps and chat platforms to communicate with kids, but how these victims are being advertised on the illicit websites.
Yeah, that's a great question. And when we talk about traffickers or trafficked victims being sold and forced to sell their bodies online, what does that mean? Because for most of us, we don't realize where this market is taking place, but it's online because that's where they're being advertised. So that's what we're talking about. And in this particular case, we'll refer back to Backpage.com because they were the big box store of human trafficking. This is where there was, let's call it sex advertising, but ultimately it was escort ads. But of those, many of those were human trafficking, and many of those were found to be they're complicit in actually selling minors for sex. So those were minors being advertised on these web platforms. So in this environment, it allows the human trafficker to get their quote-unquote product to their consumer that much more. And ultimately, I would also mention that another National Center for Missing and Exploited Children statistic was that in a 5-year period, there was an 846% increase in suspected minors being sold for sex here in the US. And so this massive scaling up is because of technologies, because of these internet sites. It's because traffickers were selling on these platforms. And so that's where Deliver Fund comes in and fights this battle.